Yeah, Deepin is unique in the sense that it, like you said, it's a business model innovation that can be applied to really any real world industry, whether it's energy or wireless or computer storage. So the variety of tokenomic models in Deepin needs to be much broader than maybe in say DeFi or other parts of crypto.
I reject the binary of applications versus infrastructure. I would argue that when people look at DePINs, they sort of think of them fundamentally as infrastructure networks. It's in the name. But I think DePINs are the strongest example of a net new consumer application in crypto. And just because the demand side doesn't always face consumers does not mean that like every person that buys a Helium hotspot or connects their machine to and turns it into a grass node is not dealing with consumer software, right? I think the thing that I'm constantly reminded of every year that I do this is that crypto is about money. It's about value transfer.
Shayon, thank you for being here with me today. You and Multicoin were some of the earliest investors in Deepin, I think before the term was even around, before we even had like an acronym for the space. Would you say your initial hopes for Deepin have been fulfilled? And what are you looking forward to in terms of like future progress that you want to see the Deepin space as a whole make?
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, we've seen a really rapid increase in the number of people who are interested in exploring this net new category of application, right? I think DePINs are fundamentally a business model innovation that are sort of singularly, uniquely enabled by crypto. And V1 of that was Amir with Helium 4 or 5 years ago. And we've sort of seen different iterations of that in, compute, bandwidth, storage, energy, every single other industry that you can think of. And I think what's happening now is people are legitimizing and understanding that this is a viable way to construct a business in an asset-light fashion and, in a way to kind of invert the cost structure for building these networks. And so that's really, really good to see. And I think what's been, what's with any sort of phase shift in technology, it takes time to fully embed itself into society and to actually work. And so what we've seen right now is a lot of supply side expansion, the thesis working in terms of you can give out tokens to reduce CapEx or redistribute CapEx. What needs to happen now is, and I think what's going to define the next era of DePINs is going to be demand side and demand first businesses. And so different sort of pragmatic approaches to onboarding that demand are going to be the things that I'm looking out for in the next kind of 12, 18, 24 months. And I think there's a lot of folks who are being very thoughtful and very pragmatic about doing that. And so I think we've proven step one, which is the supply side of the marketplace. We got to get to step two, and we're already seeing a bunch of teams making really good strides along that. So
for sure, and I'm seeing a lot of cool kind of experimentation on the tokenomics side as well. There's all these waves of DePINs that are launching, and the most recent ones are like the Daylights and the Dawns of the world, and those teams are really elite, and they're also, I think, rethinking tokenomics from the ground up. So I'm very excited to see like where those experimentations go, and I think just it's good for the space broadly.
Yeah, totally. I think one version of the story that gets told is that DePINs are very good at one specific thing, and we've I think if you sort of look at what these networks do from a first principles basis, they solve specific coordination problems. And so if you're building a marketplace, right, it doesn't really help to have huge amounts of inventory and not enough liquidity on the demand side.
Right.
And there are always weirder, unique configurations of supply that you want. And so I just think that like what's happening now, and I hope continues to happen, is that founders try to approach token emissions and token design from like as first principles a basis as they can to understand specifically in their business, in their marketplace, what they need to incentivize and structure tokens and rewards and incentives in a way that works for them.
Yeah, Deepin is unique in the sense that it, like you said, it's a business model innovation that can be applied to really any real world industry, whether it's energy or wireless or computer storage. So the variety of tokenomic models in Deepin needs to be much broader than maybe in say DeFi or other parts of crypto. Applications versus infrastructure has kind of been the debate, right? Like, what are VCs looking to fund? Do we have too much infrastructure? Is infrastructure overvalued? Like, what would you say? What side of the spectrum are you leaning these days in terms of like, are you looking to fund more infra more applications. And regardless of that, like, do you think crypto is missing any foundational infrastructure, or are we basically ready to go and ready to scale to the next billion users?
Yeah. I mean, like I reject the binary of applications versus infrastructure. I would argue that when people look at DePINs, they sort of think of them fundamentally as infrastructure networks. It's in the name. But I think DePINs are the strongest example of a net new consumer application in crypto. And just because the demand side doesn't always face consumers does not mean that like every person that buys a Helium hotspot or connects their machine to and turns it into a grass node is not dealing with consumer software, right? I think the thing that I'm constantly reminded of every year that I do this is that crypto is about money. It's about value transfer, and applications are going to, the applications that work and the infrastructure that works is going to have moneyness and the value transfer around, whatever coordination problem is being solved as core to it, right? And so in the case of DePINs, you absolutely have, a customer relationship that you have to own on the application side,
Right.
but you're also building out infrastructure. So I think, this is sort of the category that I'm most excited about. And so like, it's a weird blend where it's an application and infrastructure at the same time. That said, my general thesis has always been the two things that are scarce are block space and attention. And the closer you are to the metal on the infrastructure side, the more value you can compound. And on the other side with attention, the more you own the customer relationship on the application layer side, the more defensible that business is. The things that aren't defensible are middleware, things that don't own the relationship on either side. And so it's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's both. The answer is both. It depends on specific configurations. And I don't think there's anything foundationally missing anymore. I mean, I'm sure there are specific nuances of the product layer, but we've kind of speeded on all of the UX hassles over the last 5 years. And I think founders have like understood like, how do you package and build a product that abstracts away everything you need? And so now the only thing that matters is building out productive networks in ways that are interesting and meaningful and delivering those to end users. Those standards are in place right now.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like you've gotten a bit of a reputation in a good way as like activist or very helpful investor. Even if it's like behind the scenes, helping founders think through tokenomics or just like making introductions or whatever it is, like there's a whole spectrum of activists versus very passive investors, right? And what would you guess like recommend to early stage VCs or VCs that are just getting into the game in terms of like what's actually helpful for founders? What have you seen you've been able to do that founders have appreciated? And how would you go about recommending strategies for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think every investor is good at different things. I just sort of have over the years doing this, recognized that my source of alpha and what I do is the largest sort of principal component of that, in my view, is the work that I can do or I'm uniquely able to do for a portfolio company to meaningfully increase their probability of success. That's sort of the single most important thing for me when I'm investing, which is there some sort of coordination problem or some sort of issue here in this business as it stands today that we know that we are well equipped, either ourselves personally or through people that we work with and our collective experience as a firm, able to sort of change, the odds of the outcome there. And those are sort of the opportunities that I like to look out for. I think it's really more a function of just having been fortunate enough to see a lot. Like we've seen and been involved in and frankly made every single experiment, every single mistake that you can make when designing DePIN networks or being sort of close to them. And so it's just sort of like that pattern recognition over time has been helpful in terms of talking to our portfolio companies and guiding them to avoid the mistakes that you would normally make. But I would just say that like, in my own view, I believe that my sources of alpha comes from being involved in some of the decision making at the product and distribution side, just purely because I feel like I have some expertise there. My background is in product, and I've always enjoyed building things, and it's still sort of the thing that I get the most value out of is spending time as in the weeds as possible. And I think the reality is that makes me hopefully a better investor as well, because I'm closer to the metal, seeing the decisions getting made as opposed to potentially sort of somewhere else kind of theorizing. I do plenty of that as well, but so yeah, it's just my specific configuration of like how I like to invest. Yeah.
For sure. Well, thank you very much for joining me here today. That's all I've got for you, but this was great.
Thank you so much for having me. Big fan.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Proof of Coverage podcast. We post new episodes Mondays and Wednesdays, interviewing the best DePIN and crypto founders out there. If you like this episode, follow us on Twitter @CoverageProved and all other platforms, including YouTube and Spotify @Proof of Coverage Podcast. Thank you.